We've got Neil Magny taking on proper Mike Malott. And I think that Neil Magny has been, if not my most profitable, definitely in my top 5 most profitable fades of all time in the UFC. Now, you got to pick your spots, as with all things, right? Neil Magny's won a lot of fights in the UFC as well, but I've really done a good job picking when is a good time to fade Neil Magny. And I've always said, that I think Neil Magny at times can appear to be a fish on the mat. And what I mean by that is that there's some guys that are, maybe not very quality in their grappling. Maybe they can't go out there and submit many people, but they can certainly defend a number of submissions, right? They can be stingy, they can be tough, they can regard, they can get back to position. So are they going to win? Maybe not, but are they going to at least stay in the fight? Yes. And I think that for Neil Magny, that's very difficult at times. Frankly, I think Ian Gary absolutely let him off the hook. I think if Ian Gary decided to take him down in the first round, he takes him down in the first round and probably could have dominated that fight on the mat. But instead, what he elected to do was pick away with low ankle shots from the outside for the duration of 15 minutes. And frankly, he almost finished Neil Magny about 50 times in that fight, just wasn't able to get him out of there. So you look at Neil Magny's career, and he's made a career of being stingy, grabbing a hold of people, making it awkward in the clinch. But I look at a guy like Mike Malott, and I just say to myself, man, when you're considering the danger factor, I think that the danger factor is heavily in the favor of the Canadian Mike Malott in this spot. Neil Magny's a guy that likes to go out there, poke and prod with the jab, work from the clinch a little bit, lean on you. And shout out to Just Win Baby, says Magny going to embarrass this kid. Well, there you have it, right? He's got a different take on this, right? He thinks Neil Magny's going to go out there and get the job done. And it's very well possible, right? You look at Mike Malott, he's a guy that did start his career at 145 pounds, did take many years off, right? Neil Magny went out there and got a lot of that UFC experience while Mike Malott was on the sidelines. However, you look at Mike Malott's game today, and I think that he is proficient on the ground. He's a guy that's gone out there and gotten that black belt, competed at a pretty high level on the grappling circuit as well, and went out there and paid his dues, I feel, in that regard, trying to improve that element of his game. When you look at on the feet, I think he's a really dangerous striker. He's a bit hittable, and I've noted that in the past. I do think he has some fade-worthy tendencies. I remember Mickey Gall did bust up his face with the jabs back in the day, but you look at that fight and how he delivered Mickey Gall with a knockout blow in that fight, and it does tell you that this guy's got a lot of power, and he's not afraid to deal in the pocket and throw down. And I think that you look at the fights that he had with these kids like Solomon Renfro, Shimon Smotrisky, right? These guys that are young, on the come up, and he kind of gave them that coach lesson, right? Went out there and showed the young guys, hey, I know a couple old tricks. I can really, do some damage quick. I can make you pay if you make a mistake. And I think that Neil Magny, he relies oftentimes on giving people that vet lesson and showing them a little bit of that tour of the octagon type of a feeling. And I don't know how successful he's going to be with that against somebody like Mike, because Mike is number one fighting in Canada. And I think that he's going to bring a lot of intensity as a result. And I think when you look at Neil Magny, what causes him to wilt at times, it's guys that are thorough with their aggression. And one of my biggest bets ever was on Shavkat Rakhmonov. I had 8 units on Shavkat on the money line. And obviously we're not comparing Shavkat and Mike Malott right now, but what we're talking about is the fact that when I was fading Neil Magny, it was one of my biggest bets of all time. 8 units on the money line. Like I said, I had multiple units on the submission prop in that spot at plus 420, plus 350. I kept adding even on the way down. And that was a great spot, right? When you look at Gilbert Burns against Neil Magny, the sub prop, I think was like plus 220 or plus 260. And I said that was a great spot. And I do think that even in hindsight, that was a great spot, right? You have a shark versus a fish on the ground. And I think that when I'm looking at, a guy like this in Mike Malott, I think what he brings to the table is the fact that he might be the best fighter coming out of Canada right now. I don't know that to be true, but when you look at the Canadian ranks, especially on the men's MMA side, it's pretty dire, right? It's pretty dire straits. And I think that Mike Malott is somebody that the UFC really wants to get behind. And I think that he's got power in his hands as well as that submission equity. that I discussed. So where this gets greasy is if this fight goes the distance, right? I mentioned this with Waldo and Arlovsky last week. I didn't think Arlovsky had much of a chance at all to finish the fight, but I said if it goes to the scorecards, it feels like it's going to get a little bit greasier. And that's kind of what it seems like to me here. If this was a fight that gets to the scorecards, I think it's going to end up being, pretty sketchy here. However, if this is a fight that ends inside the distance, I think more often than not, it's going to be Mike Malott in a big way. And I'll just leave it at that. But I overall believe that Mike Malott is a guy that eventually will be fade worthy in this UFC welterweight division. But I think when you're looking at how they structured this card, I think they want Canada to have a big celebratory moment on this main card. And I think they want it to be Mike Malott, which could be Canada's best hope, in their current iterations right now. So for me, I like Mike Malott to get the job done here and probably to do it inside of the distance. But he is going to be much smaller. So let's talk about the intangibles before we move to the next fight. We've got a 4-year youth advantage favoring Mike Malott. He's going to be 32 years of age here compared to 36 for Neil Magny. And Neil Magny has way more UFC experience, right? He's been in a lot more fights in this organization for good and for ill. So 21-10 is Magny inside of the UFC compared to just a 3-0 record inside the UFC for proper Mike Malott, representing Niagara top team compared to Elevation top team for Neil Magny. So Neil Magny on the road here, taking on Mike Malott. So this is a fun fight, a good welterweight matchup. And I think it's the right fight at the right time for Mike Malott. I think he's going to get the job done here.